predicting Perth's peak?
Are we at the top at the moment? It's a good question.
Steve Ash, property investor, buyer's agent, and founder of Property Strats, shares his expert opinion on whether this red-hot city is about to start cooling down.
Sometimes a little bit easier to spot the value when someone hasn't grown. So here we're about 3 years in. We've had good growth.
There's no crystal ball, but there are ways to monitor Perth's peak.
If you start to see that number track up, that's the time to start thinking about the top is starting to come.
As well as Steve's expert opinion, he's giving us 3 metrics we can all track to better understand when Perth actually hit its peak.
There are 3 metrics you can look at.
If you've been wanting to know if you're too late to the party to invest in Perth, this is going to be an episode you're going to really enjoy. My name's Todd Sloan. This is the Pizza and Property Podcast, and you're listening to my chat with Steve Ash. Steve Ash, it's been a while. How are you, mate?
Yeah, it's been a while, Todd. Yeah, I'm very good. Thanks. Yourself?
Mate, very good. Views changed a little bit. Last time I talked to you, I think we were 60-odd floors up in Brisbane talking about your portfolio.
Yeah, no, indeed. Sort of that was a bit stormy day here, but we're here in Adelaide. It's bright blue skies out there, a bit cool, a bit fresh, but it's good.
Yeah,
away
man.
from the Brisbane heat. So,
well, and we're going to be talking about Perth today, and leaning on a little bit of your background from the investment banking and super fund management side of things, talking about predicting Perth's peak. But there's a little bit that you wanted to unpack first before we get into a few of these 3 keys that people can start monitoring or we're really keeping an eye on. So as far as the Perth market sits right now, because I know we're going to be talking about predicting its peak, but realistically, what are we looking at the moment, the time of recording?
What we can see is obviously Perth's had a fairly good run over the last 3 years. In fact, since 2021, let me just check the numbers. I believe we've had 70% annual growth since then.
That's huge. And you invested in it personally, didn't you?
Yeah, no, we were in there, for my personal portfolio in 2021. So we've seen pretty good gains there. And so other investors, if you're buying in the likes of Rockingham, Mandurah, even up north, around that sort of Queen's Rock sort of area, you'd have seen good growth, maybe properties doubling. So it's been a pretty hot market, as we all know. And yeah, good gains have been made. So I'd say we're about 3 years into that run at the moment.
And so we're about 70% up. And what are we talking about when we look at this from like more of a bigger picture lens, or through a bigger picture lens?
It's a good question. And, it's sometimes a little bit easier to spot the value when someone hasn't grown. I mean, it sticks out like a sore thumb. Like take Perth previously in that cycle between that 2009 to sort of 2020 mark, it's pretty flat during that time. So
what was the growth between that sort of time frame?
So the Perth market, if we look at it in that previous 10 years, was pretty flat, hardly grew. But then if we look at the long-term sort of growth in Perth, if I just get it up here on my screen, so over 50 years, Perth's generally grown 8% annually.
8%, okay.
And according to CoreLogic figures, if we look over the last 30 years, the numbers there, it's been 5.9% growth. And so when we've got a period of like flat growth, of hardly any growth at all in that 10-year run, we have to then think about, okay, we've had some decent gains since 2021, but have a look at other cycles and where Perth's done quite well. So obviously the glaring period was between 2003 and 2007, where the Perth market did incredibly well. In fact, it did grow. It was a 76.4% cumulative gain during that time.
It's huge.
It was massive. There was obviously a lot going on back then. There was the commodities boom. So it was just a great time. I mean, interest rates were quite higher, which is kind of mirroring the environment at the moment, which is interesting. But that was a good sort of 4 to 5 years of growth then.
Okay, so you're looking at this through that lens of historically, over a 50-year average, Perth's been doing 8% per annum. Over a 30-year, it's been doing 9%. Over the past 10, though, it's only been doing a few percent. Like it's pretty low.
Yes, yeah, pretty low. And then what we saw when it did come back into life, we saw that those numbers tick up. And as we just discussed, that was that 17% annual growth. So we're probably, if we compare it, because all we can do, we don't know when we're going to see the top of the cycle, so we look to history and see what's happened before. Probably and the most recent one was that commodities boom in 2003 to 2007. So that was a good 5-6 year growth cycle. So here we're about 3 years in. We've had good growth. So that's kind of where we're sitting. Obviously, history doesn't mean we're going to have exactly the same sort of period now, but here you can see that there's been some good gains made already. So are we at the top at the moment? It's a good question, and we'll get into that in a second.
Well, and for anyone that's listening now and they're thinking, okay, I still see a lot of value in Perth, and it's not that you're saying there isn't any value left, but you and I were having a little bit of a chat about this off air, and I thought you raised a very interesting point that if someone is still very keen on going like full Perth focused at the moment, where are you seeing the most discrepancy, the most amount of potential value?
It's a good question, and don't get me wrong, I still think there are good pockets in the housing market where you can get good deals, but where we're seeing a little value, and we're just going to go into it a little bit, in the attached market. So that's your villas, your townhouses, and your units.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an interesting stat. I'm just going to pull it up here.
Mm.
So if we just go back to 2022, so
Yeah.
here, like this was just at the start when houses were starting to grow. You could see that the median price back then, according to PropTrack data, was 587,000,
Mm-hmm.
and units were 411,000. So historically, that spread between apartment and house prices in Perth has been pretty tight.
Yep.
So if we jump forward 2 years now, that gap is the median house price according to CoreLogic now is 785,000.
785. Yep.
And the units have only grown just to 60,000 up to 470,000.
So 2022, 587 for a house, 411 for a unit. 24, 785 for a house, 470 for a unit. So what are we talking like percentage wise is here, like the difference?
Quite simply, in 2022, a unit was 70% of the house price.
Yep.
And now currently it's 60%. So you can see that the gaps have widened a little bit, presenting potentially an opportunity to look for value opportunities there.
And it's not just Perth that this is happening in either. Like this is something that's happening a little bit like countrywide.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. In fact, there's a good graph that sort of has come up and has just shown this gap has widened across the whole capital cities. I can just pull it up in a second and talk through it. And
Absolutely.
it's pretty eye-opening. See, that spread is pretty tight as we look historically through. And I've got
Was that 30 odd years?
yeah, 30 odd years, and you can see that they're tracking quite closely. So if we go back to 2004, the sort of unit price would be around that sort of 300,000 mark, with the house price about 380. So if we jump forward now, and this is across all the capital cities,
Yeah.
the average unit price is 650,279, and the median price for houses is 944,229, which is about the biggest that spread's ever been.
It's huge.
Yeah.
So this isn't something that's just unique to Perth. And this is the only reason I bring it up, because this is obviously a very Perth-focused episode.
Yeah.
But this is something that we're seeing countrywide, but it's very much applicable in Perth as well.
Yeah, it's very much applicable in Perth. If you're looking for value opportunities, because this episode and slice is to talk about opportunities there. But if we extrapolate that out to the whole country, you can see that there is opportunity in the attached dwellings. Obviously, you need to be careful if there's a lot of high rises in various areas. But if you look at good, well-placed townhouses, villas and apartments in certain areas in Sydney, particularly Brisbane and Perth, there's opportunity.
So if someone's going, okay, I'm hearing you, Steve, I can see that there's some potential here, and maybe I'm still all right to hold on to Perth for another year, 2 years, whatever it is that they feel. How are they monitoring to actually understand where the peak is? Because like you were saying before, there's no crystal ball. No one knows 100%, but there are ways to monitor predicting Perth's peak. What are 3 keys that people can really get on top of?
It's a good question. There's some metrics where you can look at it. Obviously, I think there's more juice in the lemon still in Perth to be squeezed out.
Mm-hmm.
But the 3 sort of metrics you can look at are days on market. If you start seeing them start to tick upwards a little bit.
And so what are we talking as far as a change? Because days on market for Perth are like 10 now, like they're crazy low.
Yeah, no, it's quite remarkable how low they are. But if you start to see that number track up, if you look at Suburbs Finder or other sort of tools out there, you start to see that slowly trend upwards. That's the time to start thinking about the top is starting to come into Perth.
Okay, so the first metric to track, days on market.
Yep.
And we're not wanting that to go lower if the peak's coming. We're wanting that to go higher. Well, not that we're wanting to, but if we start seeing it going higher.
Yeah, just let the data guide your decisions there. And if that's just tracking high, just be mindful.
Okay, what's the next one?
And so this is quite a good metric. So if you look at the total listings or total stock listings for Perth, at the moment, sort of it's around that 4,000 to 5,000 mark, which indicates there's not a lot of supply at all in Perth. Generally, a balanced market is 10,000 to 12,000. So if you start to see those check up, that means there's more supply coming onto the market, which again might illustrate that there's a top potentially coming through.
Okay, so and then when you say 10 to 12,000, you are talking specifically for Perth. That's not like a general rule in any way, because obviously every market is very different.
Yeah, they are. So each city's got their own sort of number, but for Perth, it's this sort of historically anyway, I should say, it's that 10 to 12,000 mark.
Okay, so it's quite literally half of the supply that it normally is.
Yeah, which again just indicates how quickly stock is selling as people are finding out there.
Gotcha. Okay, so if days on market start to increase, the supply starts to increase, we can start to go, all right, maybe it's going in that direction of peaking. What's the third one though, so we can get a little bit more confirmation?
The third one would be vendor discounting. So at the moment, you're seeing premium, obviously, to prices being sold. So if you start to see discounting come down a bit, then you can tell that it's just taking longer for houses to sell out there in Perth. And you can just be, again, mindful that we're coming towards the end a little bit, or maybe just more of a slowdown in prices going up.
So for anyone that's maybe got into property a little bit more recently, it's vendor discount is not happening in Perth right now. It's quite the opposite. It's like advertise it for 600, it goes for 700, or advertise it for 450, it goes for 5, whatever it is. Could you just explain a little bit about what vendor discounting is so they know exactly what they're tracking?
Yeah, sure. If we just go to your example, for example, you're seeing, a premium obviously in prices being sold at the moment. But if you look at a listing price and get an idea, and let's just take your example, 600,000, that it gets listed at realestate.com or Domain, etc., and you start to see those sold prices maybe tick at 580 or 570, you can see that there's a discount coming through there.
Right. So it's essentially the difference between the asking price and the sale price.
Correct.
Which currently that's a positive. But if that starts going into the negative territory and there is a discount, as the terms suggest, vendor discounting, then that's when it's like, okay, this is another metric that's really saying things are probably slowing down.
Yes, correct. It's just taking a little bit longer to sell, and they can't get the premium like which is in your example that they're getting before. They're actually having a discount to be able to get the stock sold. So they just shows a bit of weakness in the market.
I like this, man. So recapping the episode, so essentially what we're talking about, you're looking at Perth through the lens of there's still some more juice left to squeeze out of this market potentially.
Oh, yeah.
Historical averages over the past 50 odd years has got 8% average annual returns, 30 years 5.9, but then the past kind of 10 years it's still only a few percent. So you're looking at that with confidence going, there's still more left in this market potentially. If you're really wanting to squeeze the juice out of that lemon, a gap to potentially take advantage of if it fits the portfolio plan is maybe looking at units or townhouses, more attached dwellings, because of that gap that's currently in the market, not only in Perth, but countrywide. But if you're wanting to really keep a close eye on this, track your days on market. If they start coming up, it's not the best sign for Perth. If the total number of listings also starts coming up, not the best sign for Perth. Yep. And if vendor discounting all of a sudden starts happening again and discounting is happening again, all of these things, it's not like a magic number of when it hits this, it's peaked. It's more so when they're starting to shift directions, correct?
That's correct. That's correct. You've summarized that perfectly.
Mate, is there anything else that you wanted to add to this for someone that's wanting to more so understand Perth right now and predicting its peak?
I suppose the last thing, like you just made the point about attached dwellings and villas and townhouses. I mean, potentially, the yields on these are pretty good, quite close to the city. Maybe look for ones without body corporate strata costs to keep the costs down, but don't be afraid. Units and townhouses do grow. But obviously, we've seen good growth in Perth. There's a bit more to go. It's been a fantastic place to invest the last 3 years. But there's still a bit of confidence that's there. You just got to be a bit more selective in the asset that you're picking.
Love it. Steve Ash from Property Strats, thank you so much for jumping on the show, man. It's always a pleasure.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.